So this is not really part of the assembly, but I wanted to give you more detail about the resistors that you have installed in step 4 and why one of them is different than the other. Because you may ask yourself, well, I have these 3 different LEDs, I have to have 3 resistors. Why is one different? Why do I need a resistor at all? Okay, so here's the deal with this. LEDs require a certain amount of current. If you've ever tried to take an LED and without a resistor hook it to a battery, you will notice that it burns out real quick and it gets real hot, and poof, you have the magic blue smoke and it no longer works. That's because you've put too much current into it. Each resistor and LED work together to make sure that the LED receives the correct current. How do you figure out the current? Well, it depends on the voltage that the device gets, and there are plenty of calculators online that help you figure it out. The typical values you're going to see in LEDs and power supplies around 5 volts or so is going to be between 150 to 220. Whenever I'm in doubt or I think I'm going to hit 9 volts or 12 volts and I don't want to calculate it, I'll use a 470. 470 is a very, very common resistor. It might make things a little too dim, but that's a good point though. The lower the current, meaning the higher the resistance, the bigger the resistance number, the dimmer that LED is going to be given for that given voltage. So think of it as, well, let's see, one analogy I've heard, and I'm not sure if it's perfect, but it's a good one, to think about voltage versus current. Voltage, think of a pipe, right? Think of a pipe. And the voltage is how quickly those electrons move through. Zip, 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 right? Current is thought of as how big that pipe is. So if you have, is it a big fire hose pipe or is it a garden hose pipe? So think of it that way. What would happen if you hooked up your lawn sprinkler to a fire hose? It would probably blow up your sprinkler, if you had the right connector, of course. And because it's just getting too much current, it's getting too much water at one time. The speed didn't even matter. It was just so much water coming through there. So that is where your resistors help, is they kind of take that big pipe of current and they bring it down. They reduce it. It's not the perfect analogy, but it kind of helps, I think. So when you are using LEDs, you will always have a resistor. Always, always, always you'll have a resistor. And it's really annoying because you're going to be putting resistors into things all over the place, but that's life, unfortunately, for LEDs. It's so that they can support multiple voltages. The difference between the 2 and the 1 is one of these, the red LED, which we don't know yet because we haven't tested it, requires more current than the other 2 LEDs. So it gets a lower resistance, more current. The other 2 get a higher resistance and less current. Part of this has to do with the ratings of the LEDs themselves, and that's all on the spec sheets. It tells you, okay, this is the current that this needs. It also helps with color balancing, because the human eye sees different colors in different ways. The human eye has a harder time seeing red than it has green. The human eye has the easiest way of seeing blue. Blue is what our eyes are most sensitive to. If you think about it, that's actually kind of silly from a streetlight perspective, because if we see red less well than green, that's kind of the opposite of what you want at a stoplight, but that's a story for another day. So you'll might need to adjust resistance on LED sets if you're using multiple LEDs so that they're all at the same brightness. That's the idea, is that you're starting out with all at the same brightness. So like if you had red, green, and blue together, they would mix together to make a nice white. So those are the more details on the resistors and the LEDs. I hope that helps a little bit. A little bit of theory sometimes gets you going, and it prevents you from getting into trouble later on. Enjoy.